Hello, sorry I'm late. Good to see you all. So I think this time the video is automatically recorded, so we don't have that hassle anymore. Before we start, I wanted to point out that we have like a few people joining the database review effort, and that's really great. Like we have 7 people now, I think, doing database reviews, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for joining and digging into that. That's really great. I have a first point on the agenda from a few weeks back. I just wanted to point to a video for explaining 2 like optimization techniques. It's a combination of a union pushdown and a top K. Video is not really entertaining, but the techniques are quite universally and maybe interesting to look at. But you can also, if you don't want to watch the video, you can also like read the issue, and it's all there as well. Any like questions about that? If not, should we talk about marginalia?
Yeah, I've added that to the agenda. So there was a community contribution about adding marginalia to the gem to the code base. What it does, it adds comments from where the query originated. So like which clause, which file name, which file, which line and stuff like that. And we're also adding like the correlation ID, so you can track it back through, what's it called again? To Jaeger. It's still open. I haven't looked at it for quite a while, I must admit. But anyone is open to look into it or post suggestions or whether we should or should not do this, because yeah, I can imagine it has some downfalls also. But I just wanted to raise awareness of this might be landing into the GitLab code base. Anyone has suggestions or questions about that?
Do we have like an example of how does it look like?
I don't have one at hand. I think there should be one in the comments. Like the first comment from the merge request is one of the examples, but they have been working on it further to improve it. Like we want to have it behind the feature flag, and there was some stuff to make that happen, to make that a little bit complicated, and yeah, that's not finished yet.
Yeah, I am curious of where does that appear, like on the logs or like on the Rails page, or is it going to be included like in the performance bar? I mean, it means interesting. It seems interesting.
Yeah, I'm having the same questions actually, because yeah, like if it's just a Rails log, I'm not sure if it's really like easy to find. Although it depends where you're searching for it. But yeah, maybe, I'm not sure if you can do it in the performance bar. That's a good question, actually.
Actually, I thought that the gem also edits the query. So basically it would send the whole comment to Postgres even. So even when you look at the Postgres logs, you'll be able to tell where those queries come from. That's also kind of interesting, because we log for example, all the slow queries above 1 second, and then you can easily relate to the code base. Makes me think that should maybe also show up in the performance bar, because the query is the same, but I don't know.
Yeah, it depends. You might want to do the logs first and then iterate on doing also performance bar or whatever. I haven't been looking at it for a while, so I should pick it up again. Or anyone else, feel free to pick it up, by the way. Next item I put on the agenda was about, so we want to have like geo enabled on GitLab.com. There is a GitLab setup on a different region than the current one that GitLab.com is running. And we want to have like database replication because Geo needs that between the two sites, but for some reason that replication didn't remain working. So after a week or two, it stopped and it had to be kicked up again manually. This is something that blocks enabling Geo on GitLab.com. So I'm wondering, we quickly talked about it during Stan's office hours also, but maybe it's also like good to chat a little bit about it here. Do you know what's happening, Andreas?
I don't know if I have the full picture, but I remember the one issue, and that was related to the archive replication. So my understanding is that what we do to replicate to the second data center is archive replication. It's not a streaming replication. So that means they're not directly connected across data centers, but the geolocation basically consumes the write-ahead log from the archive. So it looks at what is in the GCS storage bucket, and it grabs those wall segments and it applies them locally. And that works fine as long as you don't mess up the archive. And I think that is what happened here, and also something that happens more frequently, unfortunately, is when we do a failover on the main cluster, and these days they happen more frequently. There is a chance that we actually mess up the archive storage because we push before we, the former primary would basically push to the archive storage, but the segment is not present in the actual timeline. So there is a timeline switch when we fail over, and the former primary still pushes data to the old timeline. And when the downstream cluster or the downstream Postgres instance is fast enough to catch that data, it's basically branched off the wrong path. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it does. It sort of applied what the old former primary pushed to the archive, but that is not part of the main timeline where the rest of the cluster goes to. So it's basically stuck. And the way we deal with that on Patroni is that we basically rewind the instance. So once it gets stuck, the former primary is also stuck in the same sense. It can't follow the rest of the cluster anymore because of that. But you can use PG Rewind to dial back a bit and then have it follow the right timeline. And that works quite well for Patroni, but there is currently, I think there is no way to realize that on the secondary side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I understand like the archived replication, but where or why do we need Wally for this process? Because I went into some documentation about doing that yourself with Postgres, but it does not mention Wally. I'm not sure how does that help or how does that solve?
Right. So I mean, Wally is a tool that helps us implementing the archive recovery. You can use different tools for that, but basically we're using archive recovery. And what you get from that is you totally decouple those environments. There is no way the downstream cluster would have an effect on the upstream primary location because they are decoupled. They only talk to the archive. And the alternative is to do streaming replication. So you would basically have the downstream cluster directly connect to an upstream replica or the upstream primary. And that can have an impact on, so when you, for example, consider when you run very long queries on the downstream replica, then that may have an effect on the upstream cluster, which may be unlikely in the case of Geo. I don't know.
So we're also using Wally for the GitLab.com only archiving tool, or is it especially put in place for geo?
No, that's also used on the primary location to archive. We
Backups.
for backups. We also have replicas feeding from that. But the main replication strategy for the primary cluster is streaming replication.
And is that in some way built into the product in GitLab itself, or are we setting that up behind the scenes?
Wally or?
Yeah, Wally.
Yes, Wally is part of the Omnibus Postgres package, if I recall that correctly. We're not using that for GitLab Com, but it's present.
Okay, cool. Well, then we have to look further how we can unblock this.
Do we know why we chose archive recovery over streaming replication?
I think, well, Stan mentioned the other day he wanted to have that because it can like put stress on the primary node, and we don't want that. That's one of the reasons. I've seen discussion, I think, in that issue also why we or should we use streaming replication or not, but I don't know if that would be a good idea to do.
There is also the chance, or you don't necessarily have to connect all the replicas to the primary. You can also have a cascading replication where basically a replica talks to a replica, talks to a replica, talks to the primary. That works. So if you want to avoid the impact on the primary, we could also think about having a dedicated replica just for the purpose of feeding geo, if that makes sense. I don't know, just an idea.
Yeah, maybe we should put that in a comment there, and then we can see if that's an option. Good point.
Maybe also reach out to Ongress about what their opinion is about Patroni, because presumably Patroni may also have like a functionality to set up a secondary location. I haven't looked into that.
I think that's it for this point. I think we can move on to the next one about what was happening last week with the incidents related to PG Bouncer. There was a lot of stuff going on there. There was elevated latency for several days around the same time. And there are a lot of theories, especially you can see them in the root cause analysis, the last issue I've linked there. Also, Stan talked a little bit about that the other day. I'm not sure if this really like database related, but it might be interesting to chat about a little bit. I'm not sure if you're up to speed already, Andreas.
No, I admit I'm not caught up fully with the last week's incidents.
Yeah, it seems to be a complicated problem, but as far as I understood, it was PG Bouncer that was saturated. And that caused like a really slowdown for all the other connections, which like escalated even further for all the new connections, and things really went south quickly. There were a lot of theories about that, and I'm not sure which is the plan of attack at this moment. Maybe it might be to replace PG Bouncer with Odyssey, but I'm not sure if that's the actual plan they want to go now.
I can't talk too much to the details, but I think what I understand the current plan is that we are still going to try to scale out PG Bouncer. We actually started a few weeks back. We had that problem where basically we only had one PG Bouncer running for the primary. The setup was you have database instances. One is the primary, and each of them runs a PG Bouncer. And the clients connect to this PG Bouncer to talk to that database instance. And a few weeks back, we started seeing problems that the PG Bouncer process was maxing out the CPU. So it's a single-threaded process. It was maxing out one CPU, and what we did about that was actually providing 2 dedicated PG Bouncers for the read-write traffic, and that helped a bit. But yeah, apparently we're still seeing those issues, and I know that we were talking about adding a few more PG Bouncers, so to be able to scale up PG Bouncers independently from the Postgres instances. There is a little bit that needs to be done about it in terms of how do we route the traffic to those PG Bouncer instances. But I think this is what we're currently looking at. And Odyssey is also something that we wanted to test, I think, but it's not like we're going to immediately switch to that. It's my guess.
Yeah, as far as I understood, they solve the same problem. They solve the problem in the same way, because PG Bouncer is single-threaded and Odyssey is multi-threaded. Having multiple PG Bouncers would be similar to using Odyssey. Of course, Odyssey needs firm testing before that can happen. But this is maybe interesting to switch to the next point I had, because during the incident, Myra and I were pinged by, not sure who, by Christopher, I think, if we could look at the incident, what is happening and how we could resolve that. And I personally didn't have a lot of knowledge about how the setup works and which components are used, how the production architecture is set up, and I was like, whoa, what do I need to do about this? So we were wondering, like, what is the duty about database maintainers? I always understood it was doing database reviews and helping people out, making performant queries and stuff like that. But I think there's maybe a little bit of side responsibilities about making sure that production runs correctly. What's your opinion on this?
That's a good question. I would also have said that at least until now, database maintainer or database reviewer means actually doing code reviews, and in a sense, you're also guarding the site, because we usually look at the size of the database for GitLab.com and try to make it work for that, right? So I guess naturally, when there is a problem with the database in terms of queries not performing or a migration blows up or that kind of stuff, I think naturally you'd be able to know the most about it, because you probably have looked at the MR or maybe aware of those issues. Personally, I don't think that there is no operational responsibility for a database maintainer, just like, at least my understanding is that there is no operational responsibility for backend maintainers as well. Of course, people tend to jump in when they know something about it, but it would be new to me when there was if there was any like expectation towards those kind of things. But yeah. I think on the other hand, I think that was something that there is a lot of stuff going on at the moment. It's also something I can add. You also mentioned DBRE role. That is also something that is currently transitioning, because we don't have a lot of people in that role. And we previously, a few weeks back, we engaged a consultancy to help us with the database stack, and currently looks like they're actually going to share the ownership with the database stack for GitLab.com, and they share it with one team in infrastructure, and so this is currently a bit in a transitioning state, I think. What's your take on it, or how did it go last week?
Well, besides that, not really a lot happened from production point of view, or at least not towards us. So I think, yeah, it never has been my my objective to go to like managing the production side also. It was more like helping out with reviews and stuff like that. And yeah, in a sense, it's closely related. Like you said, you know which merge requests were done and which migrations were added. So that helps, and like it helps also with production with other backend stuff that does stuff, break stuff on production. Let me say it like that. So yeah, but I'm not planning to have more operational responsibilities. I'm not sure if Myra has something to say on that.
Yeah, well, I feel the same. I mean, we joined last week incidents call because I don't remember who pinged us. I think it was Christopher or Chun. But it was more like an informative session for me because I didn't have anything special to add since I am not very knowledgeable on the reliability side of the database. And it is also a bit confusing where are the limits drawn for a database maintainer because we don't have a definition of a database maintainer, or at least we couldn't find one in the handbook. So we might start on that.
That's a good point. Do we have one for backend maintainer on the handbook?
Yes, we do.
Huh. Yeah, definitely good point. We should define that.
Okay, I'll open an issue or after the call, and then we can discuss further. Or maybe a draft the merge request, and then we'll see. Let me go ahead to the next agenda point. Was a mention we had about storing issue and merge request descriptions history in a database. They asked database, like at GL database for opinions. I couldn't like suggest something that would scale really well. So I was wondering what your take was on this, Andreas.
I'm just sorry, just before we get to that point, I have a question regarding the difference between database reviewers and database trainee maintainers. Are those the same or we are different?
I would have said I think there is a little bit of more likelihood of getting chosen from the roulette, if I recall that correctly. So you would get more pings when you're a trainee maintainer than a reviewer. And generally, I think maybe there's also a little bit more dedication towards becoming a maintainer when you're in that site, I think.
So if you are only a reviewer, that means that you get reviews, but you are not dedicated to become a maintainer. Whether you are a trainee maintainer, or you want to pursue becoming a database maintainer, right? So we can be both, really.
Yes, the one includes the other, of course.
Thanks.
All right, on that topic, and then we can jump on the other one. I just wanted to note, and there is also already a link on the agenda. There is also a proposal out there for a database engineering team, that adds a bit to, like, we're in a bit of a transitioning phase at the moment, figuring that out. But the proposal is out there to have like a team dedicated towards those database changes. And yeah, you can read all that in the MR if you want. All right, description history. So this is basically about the feature that when you change the description, we basically store all those versions and allow you to understand what the difference was, and also to revert to a previous version, right? And I remember, like, that I was just concerned with putting into that stuff or the versions into the database because of the size of those diffs. There's a huge, could be like huge textual diffs. And in other places we've seen, we actually already store a lot of data when it comes to merge request diffs. So I was a bit worried about that, but turns out that we looked at statistics for the volume of or the size of overall descriptions for MRs and issues. And it turns out that over like, what was it, 30 days, I think we would have an average of 14 megabytes of descriptions changed in these days. So it's probably also not a lot of data that would come in there if you stored it in database.
Do we have to keep the diffs forever? I would expect to, after a year or so, you could easily purge them.
Yeah, I would expect that too. I don't know if we already considered that.
I will add a comment.
Cool. And on the issue, Heinrich also pointed out that when we store text in Postgres, it's also going to be compressed when you store more than what was it, 2 kilobytes. So that is Postgres is going to compress that. So there's probably even less than that.
If I'm not mistaken, we store for the descriptions, we store the description and the rendered HTML description already, right? But I assume we would only want the history of the source, like the plain markdown, to be kept.
Yeah, I guess it would be enough. I haven't seen a discussion around that though.
Yeah, it's something that just popped my mind just now, so I'm not sure we talked about it. Someone else did think about it yet.
Did you have like another question about it, or do you think it's good to store that in database, or should it go somewhere else?
My first guess would be in Git, but I think that's really like an overdone solution, overcomplicated for this.
Yeah, I had the same reaction, but it was pointed out in that discussion that maybe a little bit more complicated than actually storing in database, and given that the size is like manageable, it's probably okay.
Yeah, in a way, you need to have it in the database anyway to make it be performant, I think, and then you'll have it at 2 places and stuff go wrong, I guess. So better not do that in our first iteration.
Cool. Should we go for table sizes on GitLab.com?
Yes, so that is a question that I have been questioning myself. So normally to get the size of a table, I go to ChatOps and count the records on that table, but I'm not sure how to get like the size on megabytes. Is there a way to get that for GitLab.com? I mean, having access to the console, that might be a way, but not sure if we have another way, easiest way.
Yes, there is a dashboard for that. If you're only interested in like overall table sizes, we have a dashboard for that. I'll find a link to that.
You can also check the database checkup report. I think it's weekly. They have a table size there.
Great, thanks. And well, the other question is one that I also get a lot. So when we are migrating data, we normally use background migration if the table is like large, like namespaces table or projects table or merge requests table. But what about if the table is small, like in numbers of records? Do we still need to use background migration, or we can do it in a normal migration, a regular one?
Probably goes back to the discussion about how long should a migration take, right? Or is there another concern with this?
Well, there are some cases in which we want to migrate information from one column to another, and the records are only like 200 or 500 or 600, in which I think the operation is going to be quite fast. So we might not need to do it in a background migration. We might simply do it in one single query directly in the migration. But that approach is not documented somewhere. So I think it might be a good idea to document it if you're okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, if it's like a thing that can be done quickly, can go to a post-deploy migration. You would still have the same concerns about batching. So even for like, or it depends on the table, obviously, but batching would still something that needs to be considered. But you can, I think you can do the same thing in a post-deploy and in a background job. If it just takes a few seconds on GitLab.com, don't see the reason of putting that into background migration already. Do you? Or is there any reason why we would want that?
No, not really. I guess it is easier to do it like in a regular migration, like code base. It would be easier to implement that than to implement the background migration. But if we always need to do it in a background migration, that's also fine. I was just wondering.
Or what does it mean to migrate data? Maybe it also sort of depends on the heaviness of the calculation. Like we've recently, there was a security related thing where we were not able to run an update query in the database, but instead, like for a full batch, but instead we were calculating fingerprints or SHA sums in the migration itself, and then you fall back to doing like single record updates, and that can actually take a while. So even for like 600 records, maybe.
Yeah, true. So I guess there is not like an easy way to tell when it should be done, like in a migration or in a background migration. It depends a lot on the table itself.
Yeah, I would say so. And the overhead from doing it in a background migration is basically you would always also need a normal migration because you want to kick off that job, and you implement that in a different place, basically in a background migration. But other than that, there is no additional complexity from using a background migration, right?
So what is like the benefit for having a post-deploy migration compared to like a pre-deployed migration? I guess you have like the same concerns when it comes down to table sizes and duration.
Well, I guess after you deploy and the post-deployment migration fails, you still have a running instance in a good state, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the main difference between normal migrations and post-deploy. One is run before the deploy or before the code is changed, and the other one is afterwards. But the rest is the same. It's just a different phase.
So should we move until up the next point? Okay. Well, so last week, a merge request was merged, and this merge request got a migration with active record code in it. And we thought that it was going to be okay because the active record was executing a service that was actually planned to be executed in a migration. But it caused some unforeseen problems, nothing major, I think, but it might be a good reinforcement that we shouldn't really add active record code in migrations. It is actually the case that Ruben talked to us in the past office hours. And we decided to put the service inside the migration because otherwise copy and pasting the service inside migration, it turned out to be a migration of 700, 600 lines, something like that. It was huge. So yeah, it was interesting. So out of that, I do have a question. It seems that new instances don't run migrations. They inherit the DB schema. But I'm not sure if they run background migrations, maybe not. And if they not, what would be the best way to trigger like data creation when a new instance is, well, created?
What kind of data creation would that be?
Ruben, you might want to answer that, please.
Yeah, so that's to create a special project for using to monitor the GitLab instance itself.
So basically similar to seeding the database in development where you create like a user or admin user, stuff like that?
Yeah, in this case, we'll be creating a group, a project, and configuring certain stuff in the project. And you'll be adding members into the group. So yeah, similar to seeding a development database.
Good question. I'm not aware of another place where we do that. Is there something maybe that the distribution team can help with? Like, guess it's sort of a way, or there something you do when you install a new instance, right? So guessing this has to do with like how do we, when you first install GitLab, how do we set up that environment? About the inheriting the schema from schema ABI, what is concerning at the moment is that we still have a difference between EE and CE. So that there is a few slight changes between those schemas. And in fact, we should have the same schema across both. I was wondering if anybody knows how far we are away from like merging the two code bases, or if there was any update on the schema differences issue.
I'm not sure about the schema differences, but I think the code unification should happen on September. The first step was to close a merge requests that were open like more than a year ago. So it should happen soon, hopefully.
Cool. Yeah.
There's an issue for merging the code base which has like a timeline of events. So you can have a look at that. I pasted it into the chat.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Cool. Anything else? Then thanks for stepping by. I think maybe we should rename that call into the database call at some point. It's great to see you all on the and also again, like I really appreciated doing database reviews. It's really great. Cool. Thanks. Have a nice day.